All right, welcome back. This is Unit 8.2, The Cold War Turns Hot. Not in a nuclear kind of heat way, thankfully, but, Cold War's heating up. Today we're going to talk about the space race and the Korean War. Tomorrow we'll talk about the House Un-American Activities Committee and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Probably the closest we came to nuclear war during the Cold War. Probably. So let's talk about the space race with our friends NASA. So we're going on a race to space. So the USSR, Russia, launches the first salvo in the space race. They launch the satellite Sputnik, and they launch it on October the 4th, 1957. This is the first man-made object that goes into orbit around the planet. Now, the only thing Sputnik could do was had a blinking light on it, and it would go beep, beep. In the resources section of your digital notebook, there's more information on Sputnik, and there's actually a link to the beep. So if you want to hear it yourself, go check it out. And the problem wasn't Sputnik. There's no weapons on it. There's no way that it can do damage to anything. It's just a big old metal ball with some, antennas attached to it. But if Russia could get that up into space, what else can it get into space? Rockets, maybe? Bombs on those rockets? Nuclear bombs on those rockets? That's scary. So this takes the U.S. by surprise, and we, I believe the technical term is freak out about this. If you saw the movie Hidden Figures, then you've seen what happens. Now, obviously, the movie's not 100% historically accurate, but they get a good chunk of it right. But the U.S. government, the U.S. military especially, freaks out, and they decide we need our own rockets that can get up into space. And so, October the 1st, 1958, less than a year after Sputnik gets launched, Congress passes a law creating NASA. So NASA's birthday is October the 1st, 1958. So when October comes back around, send a birthday card. Put it on your calendar. Set a reminder a few days in advance so you can get it in the mail in time. And they create NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Agency. So NASA astronauts and the Soviet cosmonauts, which is what Soviet Union astronauts are called, they race to see who could win the space race, basically the rest of the Cold War. And obviously, Russia wins the first battle in the race. They get something up there before we can get anything up there. And this leads to a hugely increased focus on STEM. Some of you are in STEM academies here at Northwest ISD. So clearly, we've still been doing it. But this is when the government really gets in on STEM, really gets in on this idea of science, technology, engineering, and math. So the government is just giving college students money if they're going to go into math and science. So any degree that could give us an edge in the space race was in high demand. If you wanted to go into engineering, if you wanted to go into rocketry, if you wanted to go into physics, if you wanted to go into any kind of computer stuff. Computers are super new by this point. If you've seen Hidden Figures, you know the ones I'm talking about. But if you want to go into anything like that, the government will just throw money at you to go into college so that you can help with NASA and the space race. So we will continue on checking in on the space race as we go through the next few units. But spoiler alert, we win. America number one. America wins. And we win the space race. We'll do a quick thing. The first person to get anything into space, that was Russia. The first person to get any animals into space, living things, that was Russia. The first one to get stuff into space and then bring it back down, still alive, that was Russia. The first person to bring a human being into space, that was Russia, and then he came back alive, so Russia gets both of those. But the first person to land on the moon was American. We win, baby. Is what it is. So let's take a detour over to the Korean Peninsula and the Korean War. Now it is the Korean War, the two, halves of, it's a Korean Civil War, the two halves of Korea split apart and start fighting. But to the U.S., it's not a war. So let's take a look and see what happens in Korea. June the 25th, 1950, so we're getting into it. North Korea invades South Korea. So they'd kind of split apart. There was some, disunity going on, and the North was led by Kim Il-sung, the communist in North Korea. This is a piece of North Korean propaganda art. You've got Kim Il-sung there in the center. You might know the name of some of his descendants. Kim Jong-il was his son, and he was the dictator of North Korea like when I was growing up. But then he died, and he left it to his son, Kim Jong-un, who's the current dictator of North Korea, the grandson of the guy here in the picture. And there's always rumors coming out of North Korea, but there are rumors that he may not be the dictator for a whole lot longer, and there's maybe some power struggle going on. But that's in the year 2021, not the year 1950, which is what we're talking about. So Kim Il-sung is the leader of the communist North Korea, and Syngman Rhee, which I don't think I got that one very great, sorry. He leads the nationalist South Korea. So neither one of these are like democratically elected people. They're both. Kim Il-sung definitely a dictator. Syngman Rhee maybe more of like a king or an emperor than a straight up dictator, but not exactly a democratically elected leader. Actually, I'm going to double check on that. Hold on. That might be wrong. So let me pause this. Okay. Sorry. Okay, welcome back. We're going to see how that cut works. It might not be clean. It just happens. So, wanted to kind of double check that on Syngman Rhee. So I was sort of right. He was sort of like a king, dictator type person, but he was technically elected, but then after he was elected, he kind of seized power. So obviously the study of this is much more complicated than we have time to get into in U.S. history. You could take easily an entire semester on the conditions that lead to the Korean War, just of the stuff going on in Korea, North and South Korea. So, gonna oversimplify it. Syngman Rhee is technically elected, but not much of a democratic leader, And much like earlier with Greece and Turkey, President Truman wanted to contain communism within its current borders. So, the old globe here, Korea down here. Where you at, Korea? Korean Peninsula, right next to Japan. There you are. Korean Peninsula, right down here. North Korea, South Korea, and then here's Russia, and then China. So the Russian communist influence is very, very, very close. And North Korea is very close to Russia, the communist part. So we're going to back up South Korea to try and make sure it doesn't spread further and even closer to Japan, who at that point are rebuilding, and we're sort of rebuilding relations with them. And eventually we become very strong allies with Japan. So Truman basically sees North Korea doing a surprise attack on South Korea to conquer it and turn it communist as sort of the first wave of such attacks that he suspects that Russia is behind. So he goes to the UN, and they agree that they're going to defend South Korea against the North Korean invasion. Now, when the two Koreas go to war, it is a war. The two of them are fighting a war. And we're going to send in soldiers and tanks and guns and planes. But we're not going to war, you see. Congress doesn't want to declare a war. This is a police action. So they pass a resolution saying that Truman has permission to use the army in this police action. But they don't declare war. The last war that Congress declared was World War II. So all these wars we're going to get involved in, all these police actions around the globe in the purpose of containing communism, they are all going to be unofficial, not wars. Now that doesn't mean we're not going to have soldiers fighting and generals around there and all kinds of stuff. So we have our very own General MacArthur. You might remember his name from World War II. And China basically warns the U.S. that it's going to defend any attacks past the 38th parallel into North Korea. 38th parallel is, right, well, here's 30, here's 45, so right about here. The border line, that's the 38th parallel line of latitude. Trying to remember latitude versus longitude. I haven't had to teach world geography this year, so it took me a second to remember. So General MacArthur basically says, China's lying. They're not going to defend North Korea, so we're just going to, keep attacking into the north. So China does back up their threat, and they do use some of their troops, and they do support the North Korean communist government in pushing the American troops and the South Korean troops back into South Korea, past the 38th parallel. And that's basically where the stalemate happens. We sort of stalemate that there's, technically that's still all militarized. Technically our military is still highly active in South Korea. The North Korean military is highly active. There's you've probably seen some stuff in the news, So that's still kind of the borderline, is that 38th parallel. Now, before we get into this official stalemate, before we sort of end up in this waiting game that we've been in the last 60 or 70 years, General MacArthur basically says, give me a whole bunch of nukes. I'm going to nuke China until they stop supporting North Korea. And then if I have to, I'll nuke North Korea until they stop threatening South Korea. And President Truman basically says no, and then MacArthur goes public about it. He complains publicly. He gets it in the press. And gosh, if you're a general, you can certainly disagree with the president, who's the commander of the armed forces, but you probably shouldn't publicly do it. So he gets fired. April 1951, President Truman fires General MacArthur. We obviously don't nuke China or North Korea. And we sort of end up in this stalemate at the 38th parallel. This is a picture, you can check the citation page to get the exact date, but this is a picture from the last couple of years. We get an armistice signed in 1953. Not a peace treaty. Technically, the Korean War is still happening. We are still involved in our police action. South Korea is still involved in their war. So we get an armistice, a ceasefire. We're going to stop fighting for right now, but we're not at peace. And the Republican Party accuses the Democratic Party of being soft on communism. Remember, Harry Truman, it's a Democrat. LBJ will be a Democrat soon. The other three-letter guy, one of the many three-letter presidents, JFK, LBJ. FDR, so I meant to say, FDR was a Democrat. Harry Truman was his vice president. FDR dies of polio complications toward the end of World War II. Truman takes over. Truman's the one who refuses to nuke China, refuses to nuke North Korea. So the Republican Party, in an effort to gain control back of, Congress and the executive branch, brands the Democratic Party of being soft on communism. And the demilitarized zone, the area around the 38th parallel in between the two countries, is still guarded today. If you ever go to South Korea and you want to visit the demilitarized zone, it's going to be tough to do, but it's possible. You can do it. You will have to follow a lot of very specific rules, and if you don't follow the rules, best case scenario, they're going to violently pull you out of there without really caring if you get hurt. Worst case scenario, they're going to shoot you dead because they don't want you starting the war back up. So, South Korea is a cool place. I'd love to visit it sometime. I've heard nothing but cool things, and I've seen a whole lot of travel shows with fantastic places to visit and all kinds of stuff. Seems like a really cool place to go visit one day. But if you're going to go to the demilitarized zone, follow the rules. Very important. So that's it for today. Tomorrow we'll pick up with the House Un-American Activities Committee and Senator Joseph McCarthy. So we'll see you then.